Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't facing what we find, but facing what we've hidden from ourselves. The rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers, creating a rhythm that matched Eliza Morgan's heartbeat as she stared at the half-empty mug of tea on her desk. Outside, London wore its typical grey veil, the afternoon light fading earlier than the clock suggested. She watched as droplets raced down the glass, merging and separating in patterns she couldn't predict, much like the thoughts swirling in her mind late. Her promotion certificate lay unsigned on her desk, the embossed letters catching what little light filtered through the clouds. Senior Creative Director, 5 years of meticulous work, of carefully crafted presentations and late nights had culminated in this moment. Yet something felt hollow about the achievement, as if she were celebrating a victory in a game she no longer remembered choosing to play. "Heading out early today, Liz?" poking her. "The weather's only getting worse." Eliza nodded, gathering her things with practiced efficiency. "Yes, actually. I thought I'd surprise Daniel with the news." She didn't mention the other reason, the gnawing feeling that had been growing in her stomach for weeks, the subtle shifts in her husband's behavior, the mysterious phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered a room. The late nights, he claimed, were spent at his studio, the distance in his eyes even when they shared the same bed. The commute home was quicker than usual. The rain had scared off the typical Friday crowds, leaving the underground carriages half empty. Eliza found herself studying her reflection in the dark window opposite her seat. 34 years old, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her charcoal suit unwrinkled despite the day's meetings. Her "aye." Mother's voice echoed in her mind. "A composed exterior reflects a composed interior, Elizabeth." Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Called your office. They said you left early. Everything all right?" Even from across the city, Ruth Morgan kept tabs on her daughter's movements with uncanny precision. Eliza slipped the phone back into her pocket without responding. Some conversations were better had in person, and her mother's tendency to read volumes into simple text messages had taught her caution over the years. By the time she reached their modest Victorian townhouse in Greenwich, the rain had softened to a gentle mist. Eliza paused at the front gate, taking in the home she and Daniel had renovated together during the first 2 years of their marriage. The hydrangeas he'd planted were in full bloom, their blue heads heavy with raindrop. She remembered how he'd insisted on planting them, claiming the soil's acidity would turn them that particular shade of blue she loved. "Trust the science of beauty," paint splattered across dirt. That was 5 years ago, when his paintings still sold regularly at small galleries, and before the administrative job at the Community Arts Centre had become his primary source of income. Before the light in his eyes had begun to dim with each rejected submission. Eliza shook the memories away and approached the door, noticing the living room lights were on. A small smile tugged at her lips. He was home early too. Perhaps they could celebrate together. Maybe even revisit that conversation about starting a family now that her position was secure. She inserted her key quietly, wanting to surprise him. The door opened with a soft click, and she stepped into the entryway, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. The house was unusually quiet, no music from Daniel's playlist, no TV murmuring in the background. "Daniel?" she called, setting down her bag. No answer. Her heels clicked softly across the hardwood floor as she moved toward the living room. That's when she noticed them, clothes strewn carelessly across their cream-colored sofa. Daniel's favorite blue shirt, a pair of jeans, socks. A voice drifted down from upstairs, followed by a light, feminine laugh that Eliza didn't recognize. Her breath caught in her throat as a cold wave of realization washed over her. The mysterious calls, the late nights, the emotional distance. She stood frozen, her promotion certificate clutched in her trembling hand as her perfectly structured world began to crumble around her. Eliza willed her feet to move, each step heavier than the last as she approached the stairs. The wooden steps creaked beneath her weight, a sound that had once seemed charming in their old home, but now felt like a betrayal of her presence. The bedroom door was half open, spilling soft light into the hallway. She stopped, her hand pressed against the wall for support. She could turn around. She could leave quietly and confront him later when whoever was with him had gone. She could preserve what dignity remained. But something pushed her forward. Perhaps the same determination that had propelled her career, the need to see reality clearly, no matter how painful. She took the final steps and pushed the door open. What she saw wasn't what she had expected. Daniel stood in the center of the room, completely unclothed, but there was no embrace, no tangled sheets. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his expression concentrated but relaxed, his gaze fixed on a point beyond the woman sitting in the armchair by the window. The woman, dark-haired, dressed in paint-splattered overalls, held a large sketch pad in her lap. Her fingers were stained with charcoal, and beside her on a small table sat jars of brushes and a palette of watercolor. The scent of turpentine hung in the air, not perfume. For one surreal moment, nobody moved. Then the woman's eyes widened as she noticed Eliza. The charcoal stick slipped from her fingers, leaving a dark streak across the paper as it fell. Daniel turned, his face registering shock, then embarrassment, then something worse, guilt. "Eliza," reaching for the robe hanging on the bedpost, "you're home early." "Clearly," she replied, her voice unnaturally calm despite the hurricane of emotions inside her. She recognized the woman now, Mira Castillo, an old friend from art school who she hadn't seen in months, someone she once trusted. "I should go," Mira said, hurriedly closing her sketchbook and gathering her supplies. "No," surprising her the steadiness of her voice. "I think I need an explanation first." Daniel had managed to put on his robe, tying it tightly around his waist. "It's not what you think, like." "What exactly do I think, Daniel?" she asked, her professional negotiation voice taking over as her emotions retreated behind a wall of shock. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm part of a project, a performance art series about emotional vulnerability and healing through artistic expression. Mira's leading it at the center." Mira nodded, her eyes unable to meet Eliza's. "It's called Unmasked. We've been working with several participants over the past few months." "Months," Eliza repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. "And you didn't think to mention this to me?" "I wanted to," Daniel said, moving toward her. "But you've been so busy with the promotion, and I didn't know how to explain it. It started as therapy, really. I've been struggling." The revelation hit her like a physical blow, not because of infidelity, there was none, at least not in the conventionals, but because of what had been hidden from her. Emotion, identity, expression. Her husband had been in pain, seeking healing, transforming, all without her knowledge or participation. "I think I should leave you two to talk," Mira said quietly, sliding her supplies into a canvas bag. "Yes," Eliza agreed, stepping aside to let her pass. "I think you should." As Mira slipped past her, she paused. "The exhibition opens next month at the Riverside Gallery. Daniel's work is remarkable. You should come." After Mira left, the silence in the room grew thick and oppressive. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped between his knees. Eliza remained standing, her back straight, her promotion certificate still clutched in her hand like a shield. "How long?" she finally asked. "The therapy." "Therapy? You've been in therapy for half a year and never told me?" He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting a sadness she hadn't allowed herself. "I didn't want to worry you. You were working so hard for this promotion, and I was. I was falling apart, Liza. I couldn't paint any. I couldn't feel anything. It was like I was drowning, and I didn't want to pull you down with me." Eliza felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. "So instead, you shut me out completely, made decisions about our marriage, our relationship, without me? Is that what I did?" His voice low. "Or did you shut me out for? When was the last time we talked about anything that wasn't schedules or bills or your next presentation?" The accusation stung with its kernel of truth. Eliza looked down at the certificate in her hand, the culmination of years of focus and ambition, and suddenly it seemed insignificant compared to what she might have lost while pursuing it. "I got the promotion." Daniel's expression softened. "That's wonderful. I knew you would." Surprising her, she turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking a sharp retreat down the stairs. Behind her, she heard Daniel call her name, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. If she did, she might collapse under the weight of everything she'd just discussed. In the kitchen, Eliza placed her certificate on the counter and mechanically filled the kettle with water. The familiar routine of making tea, a ritual her mother had instilled in her since childhood, gave her hands something to do while her mind raced. Daniel appeared in the doorway, now dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, his hair still disheveled. "Liza, please, can we talk about this?" "What is there to talk about?" she asked, measuring tea leaves into the pot with precision. "You've been living a separate life for months. You've been in pain, and instead of turning to me, you turned to art and Mira." "It's not about Mira," stepping into. "She's just facilitating the project. This is about me finding my voice again." "Your voice," Eliza repeated, watching the water begin to boil. "And what about our voice, Daniel? What about the partnership we promised each?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know if we've had a partnership for a while, Liza. More like parallel lives that occasionally intersect. The kettle whistled, a high-pitched scream that matched the tension in the room. Eliza poured the water over the leaves, watching them unfurl and bleed color into the clear liquid. "So this is my fault?" she asked, setting the kettle down with more force than necessary. "Because I've been working hard? Because I've been trying to build security for us?" "No," Daniel said, leaning against the counter. "It's not about fault, it's about what we've both lost along the way." Eliza felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She wouldn't cry. Crying meant losing control, and she'd already lost too much today. "I need some time, leaving the tea. I can't process this." That night, she slept on the couch, surrounded by the throw pillows she'd carefully selected to complement their living room decor. Daniel had brought her a blanket and tried again to talk, but she had turned away, feigning sleep until he eventually retreated upstairs. In the darkness, Eliza stared at the ceiling, trying to pinpoint exactly when they had begun to drift apart. Was it when his art career had stalled, when her workload had increased? Or had the seeds been planted earlier in the fundamental differences in how they approached life? Her need for structure and certainty, his embrace of chaos and creativity. The rain continued through the night, a constant patter against the windows that matched the rhythm of her thoughts as she cycled through anger, hurt, and a strange, unexpected sense of loss. Not just for what they had been, but for what they might have become if they had remained open to each other. The weeks that followed changed everything. Eliza, typically structured and fiercely composed, found her carefully crafted routines beginning to fray at the edges. She rose earlier each morning, avoiding breakfast with Daniel. She stayed later at the office, claiming the demands of her new position required the extra hours. When she did come home, she ate dinner alone at the kitchen island, scrolling through work emails while Daniel moved quietly around the house like a ghost. One evening, unable to focus on the quarterly report open on her laptop, she wandered into Daniel's studio, a small converted bedroom they had painted together in the early days of their marriage. She hadn't entered the space in months, perhaps longer. The room smelled of linseed oil and clay, familiar scents that transported her back to their university days when they'd first met in a required art history. She, a business major with a minor in design. He, an art student with dreams of galleries and international exhibitions. Canvases lined the walls, most covered with sheets, but one stood uncovered on an easel by the window, a work in progress that made her breath catch. It was a series of interconnected figures, their forms blending into each other in a dance of shadows and light. The style was unmistakably Daniel's, but there was a rawness to it she hadn't seen before, an emotional intensity that reached out from the canvas and grabbed her by the throat. In the corner of the room, a portfolio lay open, filled with charcoal sketches, studies for the larger work, she assumed. Curiosity drew her closer. She knelt beside the portfolio and carefully turned the pages, each one revealing figures in various states of emotional expression: joy, grief, anger, ecstasy. Then she saw her own face. Not a recent portrait, but a memory captured in charcoal. Eliza at 22, her hair loose around her shoulders, her expression unguarded as she laughed at something beyond the frame. Beside it was another sketch, this one showing her bent over a design project, her brow furrowed in concentration. The next page revealed something unexpected, a digital printout of a mood board she had created years ago, during a brief period when she'd considered leaving corporate design to open a creative wellness studio. It had been a fleeting dream, abandoned when practical considerations and her mother's subtle disapproval had pushed her toward a more conventional path. Yet here it was, preserved among Daniel's newest works, and below it a formal application to an art festival, with both their names listed as co-creators of an installation titled Unseen Foundations. Eliza's hands trembled as she closed the portfolio. This wasn't just Daniel finding his voice, this was him reclaiming a part of them that had been lost. And rather than feeling grateful, she felt confronted by a version of herself she had carefully packed away. When Daniel found her still sitting on the studio floor an hour later, she didn't look up. "You used me." He knelt beside her, keeping a careful distance. "I hope that's okay. They were beautiful. They still are." "Why?" Finally me. "Because they're part of our story. The parts we've shared and the parts we've hidden, even from ourselves." She stood abruptly, needing to escape the intimacy of the moment. "You should have asked." As summer approached, Eliza buried herself in work. Her new role was demanding, leading a mentorship program for junior designers, organizing workshops with clients, and managing tight deadlines for the agency's biggest accounts. The structure provided comfort, a framework within which she could function without confronting the uncertainty at home. It was during one of these workshops that she met Zoe Chen, a bright-eyed intern with a portfolio full of conceptual designs that pushed boundaries Eliza had long ago accepted as fixed. At 23, Zoe possessed the same idealism and creative fearlessness that Eliza had once prided herself before pragmatism and professional advancement had taken precedence. "These are really interesting," Eliza said, flipping through Zoe's designs for a wellness center that combined traditional Chinese medicine with modern therapeutic practices. "The integration of cultural elements with contemporary design is unexpected." Zoe beamed. "That's kind of my thing, finding connections between traditional wisdom and modern needs. My grandmother was a healer in her village before moving to London. I grew up watching her blend ancient practices with Western medicine." Something about the young woman's enthusiasm sparked a forgotten flame in Eliza. She found herself looking forward to their weekly meetings, to Zoe's questions that often bordered on impertinent, but always pushed Eliza to think beyond her carefully constructed professional persona. "Why'd you stop designing spaces?" Zoe asked one afternoon as they reviewed layouts for a corporate rebrand. "Your spatial concepts are incredible. Do you still paint?" The questions caught Eliza off guard. "I focus my creative energy on client solutions now," she answered automatically, the response practiced and professional. But Zoe wasn't satisfied. "That's what you do, not why you stopped doing what you obviously love." The words followed Eliza home that evening, echoing in her mind as she entered the unusually quiet house. She found Daniel in the kitchen, attempting to salvage a burnt stir-fry. "I thought I'd cook tonight," he explained, scraping charred vegetables. "It's been a while since we ate together." The gesture, small as it was, pierced through the wall she'd been building. She set down her bag and rolled up her sleeves. "Let me help," opening the refrigerator to survey what ingredients remained. "We can start over." They worked side by side, the familiar rhythm of chopping and stirring creating a temporary truce. When their hands occasionally brushed, neither pulled away immediately, as they had been doing in recent weeks. "How's the new job?" Daniel asked, carefully measuring rice into a pot. "Challenging, but good. I'm mentoring this intern, Zoe. She reminds me of someone I used." Daniel glanced at "You?" Eliza nodded, surprised by his perception. "Maybe, before everything got so complicated," he offered. "Structured," she corrected, then paused. "She asked me today why I stopped designing spaces, why I don't paint anymore." "What did you tell her?" Eliza focused on the vegetables sizzling in the pan. "The truth? I don't remember making a conscious decision to stop. It just happened. Life moved forward. Priorities shifted." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications that extended far beyond her abandoned creative pursuits. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I don't think I've allowed myself to consider it." Before Daniel could respond, the front door opened, and Ruth Morgan's voice called out from the entryway. "Elizabeth, Daniel, is anyone home?" Eliza froze, the wooden spoon suspended over the pan. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Ruth appeared in the kitchen doorway, a small suitcase beside her. At 64, she remained formidable, her silver hair cut in a precise bob, her clothing modest but impeccably tailored, her posture ramrod straight despite the slight limp in her right leg. "I took a fall last week," Ruth explained, noticing Eliza's gaze on the cane. "Nothing serious, but Dr. Patel suggested I shouldn't be alone while recovering. I tried calling, but you didn't answer." Guilt washed over Eliza. She had been avoiding her mother's calls, unable to face questions about her promotion celebration or her plans for starting a family now that her career was established. "I'm so sorry to hear that," she said, moving to help her mother with the suitcase. "You should have told me you were coming. I would have prepared the guest room." "I did tell you," Ruth said, her tone carrying a familiar note of disapproval. "I left a message yesterday. Daniel, dear, whatever you're cooking smells like it's burning again." Daniel turned quickly back to the stove, but not before Eliza caught the flash of frustration in his eyes. Her mother had always had a talent for pointing out his shortcomings, however subtly. "We're just throwing something together," Eliza explained, leading her mother to the living room. "Let me help you get settled, and then we can all eat." Ruth surveyed the room with a critical eye, noting the pillow and folded blanket on the couch. "Is someone sleeping down here?" Eliza hesitated. "I've been working late. Sometimes I fall asleep while reviewing reports." It wasn't entirely a lie, but Ruth's raised eyebrow suggested she wasn't convinced. Still, she allowed Eliza to help her to the guest room without further comment. As Eliza changed the sheets and arranged fresh towels in the adjoining bathroom, she felt the weight of her mother's presence settling over the house like a heavy fog. Ruth Morgan had always been a force in her daughter's life. Loving but demanding, supportive but critical, a widow who had sacrificed her own dreams to provide stability for her only child. "Your father would be proud of your promotion," Ruth said, as Eliza fluffed the pillows. "He always said you had the mind for business." Eliza nodded, accepting the compliment with the same mixed emotions she always felt when her mother invoked her father's memory. James Morgan had died when Eliza was 14, leaving behind a successful accounting practice and a legacy of practical ambition that Ruth had ensured their daughter upheld. "The house seems tense," Ruth observed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Is everything all right between you and Daniel?" "We're fine," Eliza replied automatically. "Just busy. The promotion has meant longer hours, and Daniel has a new project at the Arts Center," Ruth murmured, the sound conveying volumes of doubt. "Well, I won't intrude for long, just until this leg heals properly." But as the days passed, Ruth's presence only added to the strained atmosphere. She commented on the takeout containers that had accumulated in the refrigerator, the dust gathering on the bookshelves, the silence that stretched between Eliza and Daniel during the few meals they shared. Her observations, always delivered with an air of concerned helpfulness, scraped against Eliza's already raw nerves. "Marriage requires attention," Ruth said one evening as they washed dishes together. "It's like a garden, neglect it, and weeds take over." Eliza scrubbed a pot with unnecessary force. "I'm aware of that." "Are you?" Ruth asked gently. "Because from what I can see, you and Daniel are living separate lives under the same roof. That's not a marriage, that's a housing arrangement." The words hit too close to the truth, and Eliza felt tears threatening. She blinked them back, focusing on the task at hand. "It's complicated." Ruth dried a plate with methodical precision. "It always is, but complications don't resolve themselves through avoidance." Later that night, unable to sleep on the increasingly uncomfortable couch, Eliza found herself drawn once again to Daniel's studio. The door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. She paused, hearing the soft scratch of pencil on paper. She should turn back, maintain the distance that had become their new normal. But Zoe's questions and her mother's observations had created hairline fractures in her carefully constructed walls. Eliza pushed the door open wider. Daniel sat at his drafting table, bent over a large sheet of paper. He didn't look up immediately, his focus complete as his hand moved in swift, confident strokes across the surface. She watched silently, struck by how at peace he seemed, how present in a way she couldn't remember seeing him, perhaps in a way she hadn't allowed herself to see. Finally, he sensed her presence and looked up. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by caution. "It's late," setting down his pencil. "Can't sleep?" Eliza shook her head, stepping fully into the room. "The couch isn't designed for long-term occupancy." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You could come back to the bed. I don't bite." "Don't you?" she asked, the words escaping before she could filter them. "It feels like we've been drawing blood for months now." Daniel's smile faded. He pushed back from the drafting table, creating space for her to approach if she chose. "Maybe we have been, but I'm tired of it, Liza, aren't you?" She moved closer, her eyes drawn to the drawing he'd been working on, a complex architectural rendering that looked strangely familiar. "What is this?" leaning over to study the "Your wellness center, or at least my interpretation of it from the mood board you created years ago. I thought maybe we could collaborate on it, for the festival." Eliza stared at the drawing, emotions colliding inside her, anger at the presumption, confusion at his persistence, and somewhere beneath it all, a spark of something that felt dangerously like hope. "Why are you doing this, Daniel? Why now?" He met her gaze directly. "Because I miss you. Not just physically, though I do miss that, but I miss who we were together. Who we could be if we stopped hiding from each other." "I'm not hiding," she protested weakly. "Aren't you?" he challenged gently. "Behind your promotion, your schedules, your perfectly ordered life, just like I've been hiding behind my struggles, my therapy, my art." The truth of his words resonated painfully. Eliza traced a finger over the drawing, following the lines of a space she had once imagined as a haven for creative healing, a dream she'd abandoned for practical certainty. "I don't know if I can go back to that person," she admitted. "I don't know if she still exists." Daniel stood, closing the distance between them without touching her. "I'm not asking you to go back. I'm asking if you're willing to move forward, together, to see what we might become instead of clinging to what we've been." Before she could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. Ruth stood in the doorway, her robe belted tightly around her waist, her cane in hand. "I heard voices," her eyes taking in them with practice. "I wanted to make sure everything." "We're fine, Mother," stepping back from Daniel. "Just talking." Ruth nodded, unconvinced. Well, it's nearly midnight. Perhaps the conversation could continue in the morning. After she left, the moment between them, Eliza felt the walls rebuilding themselves, brick by emotional brick. She's right. Moving toward. It's late. Daniel didn't try to stop her, but his voice followed her into the hallway. Think about it, Liza. Please. That night, lying on the couch with the sounds of the old house settling around her, Eliza found herself doing exactly that, thinking about the drawing, about Daniel's invitation, about the version of herself she had carefully packed away years ago. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to wonder if that self might still exist somewhere beneath the layers of professional achievement and practiced composure, waiting, like a seed in frozen ground, for the right conditions to grow again. The next morning, Eliza woke to the sound of her mother in the kitchen, the familiar clatter of pots and the scent of brewing tea creating a momentary disorientation. For a second, she was 16 again, waking in her childhood home before school. Reality reasserted itself as she sat up, her back aching from another night on the couch. She checked her phone, 6:15 a.m., earlier than she needed to be up, but too late to try falling back asleep. In the kitchen, Ruth was arranging tea things on a tray, her movements deliberate despite the cane propped against the counter. "Good morning," Eliza said, running a hand through her disheveled hair. Ruth looked up, her expression softening slightly at the sight of her daughter. "You look exhausted, Elizabeth. That couch is doing you no favors." Eliza didn't argue the point. She moved to help with the tray, but Ruth waved her away. "I'm perfectly capable. Sit." Reluctantly, Eliza took a seat at the kitchen island, watching as her mother poured steaming tea into delicate cups that Eliza didn't recognize. "These aren't ours," accepting a... "I brought them from home," Ruth explained. "They were your grandmother's. I thought, well, it seemed like this household could use some ritual." The tea was darker and more fragrant than Eliza's usual morning brew, with hints of cardamom and cinnamon. "This isn't English breakfast. It's masala chai," Ruth said, joining her at the island. "Your father loved it, remember? Said it cleared his mind better than coffee ever could." Eliza did remember, though she hadn't thought of it in years. Her father bringing home tins of loose tea from his travels, the kitchen filling with exotic scents as her mother reluctantly learned to prepare it to his liking. "I found Daniel's exhibition announcement," Ruth said after a moment of companionable silence. "On the hall table. Quite impressive." Eliza tensed. "I didn't realize he'd left it there." "He didn't," Ruth admitted. "I found it in his studio when I was looking for something to read yesterday afternoon. The exhibition opens next week. Do you plan to attend?" "I haven't decided," focusing. Ruth studied her daughter over the rim of her cup. "You know, your father and I went through a difficult period after his first heart attack. He was only 42, younger than you are now. It changed him in ways I couldn't understand." Eliza looked up, surprised. Her parents' marriage had always seemed a model of stability, perhaps lacking in passion, but solid and enduring. "He withdrew," Ruth continued, her voice taking on a distant quality. "Spent hours in the garden. Refused to discuss the future. I was terrified he was preparing to leave, not just me, but this world. It wasn't until I found him crying over a patch of failed tomato plants that I realized he was grieving for the life he thought he'd lost." "What did you do?" Eliza asked, drawn into this unexpected glimpse of her parents' private struggles. Ruth's lips curved in a small smile. "I learned to garden. Terrible at it at first. Killed more plants than I saved. But it gave us common ground when words failed. Sometimes, Elizabeth, love means meeting someone where they are, even if it's not where you expected to find them." The wisdom in her mother's words lingered as Eliza prepared for work, choosing her outfit with less attention to corporate polish than usual. She selected a silk blouse in a deep teal, a color Daniel had once said brought out the gold flecks in her eyes, and left her hair looser than her typical severe bun. At the office, she found Zoe waiting outside her door, portfolio in hand and excitement practically radiating from her slender frame. "I have an idea for the Westfield project," the intern announced without preamble. "A complete reconceptualization that integrates wellness principles with commercial function." Eliza raised an eyebrow but gestured for her to enter. "The brief calls for a standard retail space, Zoe." "Exactly, which is why every shopping mall looks the same and nobody wants to spend time there anymore," Zoe argued, spreading her sketches across Eliza's desk. "But what if we designed a space that invited lingering, that incorporated natural elements, meditation corners, and community gathering areas alongside traditional retail?" Eliza studied the drawings, impressed despite herself by the boldness of the concept. "Westfield hired us for a refresh, not a revolution. Sometimes people don't know what they need until you show them," Zoe countered, her confidence unwavering. Isn't that what design is about? Seeing possibilities others miss? The question struck a chord, echoing uncomfortably with Daniel's words from the night before. I miss who we were together, who we could be if we stopped hiding from each other. This would be a hard sell to the client, Eliza said, running her finger along a particularly innovative use of vertical space. And to Marcus. The firm's creative director was notoriously risk-averse. Zoe's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. So we don't even try? Just stick to the safe path because it's easier? The challenge in the young woman's voice was unmistakable, and Eliza felt a flash of irritation followed by something more uncomfortable: recognition. How many times had she chosen the safe path in recent years? How many creative impulses had she suppressed in favor of predictable outcome? I didn't say I'd gathering the draft a presentation. We'll review it together before deciding if it's ready for the... Zoe's face lit. Really? You'll consider... I'll consider it, Eliza, surprised by the sense of possibility that unfurled within her. Now, don't you have a team meeting? After Zoe left, Eliza found herself staring at the younger woman's sketches, her mind drifting to the drawing Daniel had been working on. Her wellness center, reimagined through his artistic lens. The two concepts shared a philosophical core. Spaces designed not just for function, but for emotional and spiritual well-being. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Mira asked if you'd be willing to speak at the exhibition opening, about creative suppression and rebirth. No pressure, just an invitation. Eliza set the phone down without responding, the request simultaneously tempting and terrifying. What could she possibly say about creative rebirth when she'd spent years burying her own creative? What could she possibly say about creative rebirth when she'd spent years burying her own creative impulses under the weight of professional advancement and practical considerations? Yet the idea planted itself in her mind, taking root alongside Zoe's bold designs and Daniel's architectural rendering, seeds of possibility in soil she had long ago declared barren. The week passed in a blur of client meetings and design reviews. At home, an uneasy truce had formed, with Ruth acting as both buffer and catalyst between Eliza and Daniel. They shared meals again, conversation carefully limited to safe topics, neighborhood news, Ruth's improving mobility, the changing weather as summer reached its peak. Eliza continued sleeping on the couch, though each night the distance between her and their shared bedroom seemed to grow more arbitrary, a line drawn in sand rather than stone. One evening, as she helped her mother with the laundry, another ritual Ruth had imposed upon the household, Eliza noticed how carefully the older woman folded Daniel's shirts, smoothing each crease with practiced hands. "He reminds me of your father sometimes," Ruth said, following Eliza's gaze. "That same restless energy, the same capacity for joy in small things." Eliza matched her mother's methodical folding, creating neat stacks of pillowcases. "I thought you disapproved of him, of his career choice." Ruth paused, considering. "I worried," she corrected. "The art world is unstable. I wanted security for you after everything with your father's illness, the medical bills." "I know," Eliza said softly. Her father's early death had left emotional scars, but the financial strain leading up to it had taught both Morgan women hard lessons about economic vulnerability. "But I was wrong to project those fears onto your marriage," Ruth continued, surprising Eliza with her candor. "Daniel loves you. That's worth more than a steady paycheck." Eliza looked up sharply. "We never said anything about love being the issue." Ruth gave her daughter a knowing look. "You didn't have to. It's written in the silence between you, in the way you both orbit each other without connecting." Later that night, unable to sleep, Eliza found Ruth in the kitchen, making tea in the soft glow of the under-cabinet lights. Without her usual perfect posture and tailored clothing, her mother looked smaller, more vulnerable. "Can't sleep either?" Eliza asked, joining her at the counter. Ruth shook her head. "Old bones, old thoughts. They keep me company at night." They settled at the kitchen table, steam rising from their cups in the quiet house. Outside, a summer storm was brewing, occasional flashes of lightning illuminating the garden Daniel had once tended with such care. "I wanted to be a dancer," Ruth said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did I ever tell you that?" Eliza stared at her mother, trying to reconcile this revelation with the practical, no-nonsense woman who had raised her. "No, you never did." "Classical ballet, I studied for years. Was quite good, actually. Had an opportunity to join a company in Birmingham when I was 19. Ruth traced the rim of her cup with one elegant finger. "My parents forbid it. Said it wasn't a proper career for a respectable young woman." "What did you do?" Eliza asked, captivated by this glimpse into her mother's hidden past. What was expected? Ruth replied simply. Went to secretarial college, met your father, built a life that everyone approved of. She looked up, meeting her daughter's gaze directly. Don't misunderstand. I loved your father. I loved the life we created, especially you. But there are nights, even now, when I dream of dancing. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Finally, Ruth reached across the table and covered Eliza's hand with her own. We don't dream loudly in this family, but maybe that's our curse, not our virtue. The words followed Eliza into restless sleep, merging with her dreams until she wasn't sure if the conversation had actually happened or if she'd imagined it. But the next morning, she noticed her mother moving through the kitchen with a subtle grace she'd never recognized before, the ghost of a dancer living within the practical housewife. That afternoon, Daniel approached her cautiously as she worked on her laptop at the dining table. I have an art therapy session tonight, at the center. He hesitated, then added, Would you like to come? Just to observe. No pressure to participate. Eliza's immediate instinct was to refuse, to retreat behind the wall of work that had protected her from emotional vulnerability for so long. But her mother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes love means meeting someone where they are, even if it's not where you expected to find them. The Community Arts Center was housed in a converted Victorian factory, its brick walls and high windows preserving the industrial character while creating a space for creative expression. Eliza had visited many times over the years for Daniel's exhibitions or community events, but she'd never been to the therapy rooms on the upper floor. Daniel led her through a maze of corridors to a large, open studio filled with easels, clay-spattered tables, and comfortable seating arranged in a loose circle. A few people were already there, chatting quietly or setting up materials. This is Eliza. Daniel introduced her to the group leader, a gentle-eyed man named Tariq, who wore paint-splattered overalls similar to Mira's. My wife. She's just observing tonight. Tariq smiled warmly. Welcome. Find any space that feels comfortable. The only rule is respect. For yourself, for others, and for the creative process. Eliza chose a seat slightly removed from the circle, positioning herself where she could watch without being too conspicuous. As more people arrived, she was struck by their diversity. Different ages, backgrounds, professions, all united by some unnamed need to express what words alone couldn't capture. The session began with a simple breathing exercise, followed by Tariq's soft-spoken invitation. Tonight, we're exploring boundaries, those we create, those imposed on us, and those we might be ready to transform. There are no right answers, only your truth as you understand it today. Daniel sat at an easel, his focus complete as he began to work with charcoal on a large sheet of paper. Others chose clay, collage materials, or paint. The room fell into a comfortable silence, punctuated only by the sounds of creation, the scratch of pencils, the wet slap of clay, the rustle of paper. Eliza watched, particularly drawn to a middle-aged woman who worked with fierce concentration on a series of concentric circles in vibrant colors. As the woman painted, tears streamed silently down her face, but her hand remained steady, her expression one of deep release rather than pain. Across the room, Daniel's charcoal moved with confidence across his paper. From her position, Eliza couldn't see what he was creating, but she recognized the flow state he had entered, a total immersion she had once envied and admired in equal measure. When the creation period ended, Tariq invited those who wished to share their work and the emotions behind it. To Eliza's surprise, nearly everyone did, revealing personal struggles, childhood wounds, relationship challenges, and moments of transcendence through their art. The woman with the concentric circles explained that each ring represented a protective barrier she had built around herself after her divorce. Barriers that had kept her safe, but also isolated. The outermost circles, painted in radiant yellows and oranges, represented her first steps toward opening herself to connection again. When it was Daniel's turn, he hesitated, glancing at Eliza before turning his easel toward the group. The image took her breath away. A figure caught between two architectural structures. One was rigid, geometric, with clean lines and perfect symmetry. The other was organic, flowing, with spaces that opened to nature and light. The figure stood at the threshold between them, 1 foot in each world, face turned toward the sky in what might have been anguish or revelation. This is about living divided, Daniel explained, his voice steady but vulnerable. About the structures we build to contain ourselves and the wild spaces we long for. About finding integration when everything pulls us apart. Eliza felt the weight of every eye in the room turning subtly toward her, though no one stared directly. She fought the urge to leave, to escape the raw emotion filling the space. Instead, she made herself meet Daniel's gaze across the room, a brief connection that acknowledged what was happening without judgment. When the session ended, people lingered, talking in small groups or cleaning up their materials. Tariq approached Eliza with a sketch pad and charcoal. "Would you like to try?" She shook her head. "I'm just here to observe." He nodded, respecting her boundary, but left the materials on the chair beside her. Sometimes observation is its own form of participation, but if you change your mind, these will be here. Daniel gave her space on the walk home, neither pressuring her to discuss the session nor acting as if nothing significant had happened. The night air was warm, scented with summer flowers and distant rain. "Thank you for coming," as they approached their... "I know it wasn't easy." Eliza nodded, her mind still processing the emotions the session had. Those people. They were so open, so vulnerable. "That's the point," Daniel said, "creating safe space to express what we can't say in words." "And does it help?" she asked, genuinely curious. "The art therapy?" He considered the question seriously. "It doesn't fix everything, but it makes the broken places visible, and sometimes seeing clearly is the first step toward healing." When they reached home, Ruth was waiting up, pretending to read, but clearly monitoring. Eliza recognized from her teenage her mother's way of expressing concern without direct interrogation. "How was your evening?" Ruth asked, setting aside her book. "Educational," surprised to find. "I'm tired, though. I think I'll head up to bed." Both Daniel and Ruth looked startled by the statement, the first indication in weeks that Eliza might be ready to reclaim her place in the marital bedroom. Daniel recovered first. "I'll be up in a bit. Just going to check some emails." In their bedroom, Eliza moved through her nighttime routine with deliberate care, reacquainting herself with the space she had abandoned. The sheets were fresh, the pillows fluffed. Ruth's doing, no doubt. On her nightstand, a small vase held a single hydrangea bloom, its blue petals perfectly preserved. She touched it gently, recognizing it as one of the flowers Daniel had planted for her years ago. The gesture spoke volumes, his quiet hope, his patient waiting, his remembrance of who they had been to each other. When he finally joined her, they lay side by side in the darkness, not touching, but sharing space in a way that felt both familiar and new. "Mira called today," Daniel said. "She's still hoping you'll speak at the exhibition." Eliza turned to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the dim room. "What would I possibly say?" "I'm not an artist, Daniel. Not anymore." "You're a creator," he countered, "whether you acknowledge it or not. And your perspective on creative suppression would be powerful, especially for women who've set aside their artistic voices for practical concerns." The invitation lingered between them, neither accepted nor refused, as sleep gradually claimed them both, still separate but no longer actively divided. The next morning brought unexpected news. Zoe arrived at Eliza's office, practically vibrating with excitement. "Greenhouse Studios wants to interview for a junior designer position," she announced, waving an email on her phone. "They saw my portfolio at the university showcase last month." Eliza felt a complex mix of emotions, pride in her protégé's talent being recognized, but also a sharp pang at the thought of losing the young woman's infectious enthusiasm and bold perspectives. "That's wonderful," she said, making her voice warm despite her conflicted feelings. "Greenhouse is doing innovative work." Zoe's expression shifted, uncertainty clouding her excitement. "But I'm not sure if I should take the interview. The starting salary is much lower than what I'd make if I stayed here after my internship. And the position is more experimental, less stability." The conversation echoed uncomfortably with decisions Eliza herself had made years ago, choosing security over creative fulfillment, practical advancement over passionate exploration. "What does your gut tell you?" she asked, genuinely curious about Zoe's internal compass. "That I'd be crazy to pass up the opportunity," Zoe admitted. "Their work aligns perfectly with my values and vision. But my parents sacrificed so much for my education. They want me to have financial security, a clear career path." Eliza recognized the dilemma all too well, the weight of expectations, the fear of disappointing those who had invested in your future. "Take the interview," he said decisively. "Gathering information doesn't commit you to a decision." And Zoe, she hesitated, then pushed forward. "Don't let someone else's definition of success determine your path, even if they love you, especially if they love you." The advice felt hypocritical, given her own choices, but perhaps that was precisely why she offered it, because she understood the cost of those decisions in a way the younger woman couldn't yet comprehend. After Zoe left, Eliza found herself opening her desk drawer and removing a small leather-bound journal she hadn't touched in years. Its pages smelled of dust and jasmine, filled with notes, sketches, and scribbled floor plans of the wellness center she had once dreamed of creating, a space where creativity and healing would intertwine. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages, reacquainting herself with a vision she had systematically buried beneath layers of professional achievement and practical compromise. The ideas still resonated, perhaps even more powerfully now that she had witnessed the therapeutic potential of creative expression at Daniel's session. What might have happened if she had pursued this path instead of the safe corporate route? Who might she have become? The questions had no easy answers, but for the first time in years, Eliza allowed herself to sit with the possibility rather than dismissing it as impractical fantasy. That evening, she called Mira and agreed to speak at the exhibition opening. "But I'll need some help preparing," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I've engaged with these ideas publicly." "That's exactly why your voice matters," Mira replied, her excitement palpable even through the phone. "You understand both worlds, the creative and the corporate, the structured and the free." The days that followed took on a different rhythm. Eliza still went to work, still managed her team and client projects, but she began carving out time for preparation, reading articles on creative suppression, interviewing women who had reclaimed artistic practices after years of dormancy, revisiting her own abandoned designs with fresh eyes. Daniel gave her space for this exploration, neither inserting himself into the process nor remaining completely distant. He left books on her nightstand that he thought might inspire her, shared relevant articles without comment, and once silently placed her old sketchbooks beside her laptop when she was working late. Ruth, too, seemed to sense the shift in her daughter. She began sharing more stories from her youth, not just about her dancing dreams, but about other women in their family who had balanced creative pursuits with practical responsibilities. Great Aunt Lydia, who had written poetry while running a successful millinery shop. Cousin Margaret, who had designed theatrical costumes while raising 5 children alone. "We've always had the spark," Ruth observed one as they walked slowly through the local park, her cane tapping a gentle rhythm on the path. "We just haven't always had permission to let it burn brightly." The insight stayed with Eliza as she refined her thoughts for the exhibition tour. She found herself reviewing her career with new eyes, not dismissing her achievements, but acknowledging the parts of herself she had systematically silenced in pursuit of those accomplishments. The night before the exhibition opening, as Eliza rehearsed her speech one final time in the privacy of their bedroom, Daniel knocked softly before entering, a small courtesy that acknowledged the new boundaries they were learning to navigate. "How's it coming?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Terrifying," she admitted with a small laugh, "but necessary, for me, if no one else." He nodded, understanding. "I have something to show you, if you're interested." Curious, Eliza followed him to his studio, where a large canvas stood covered with a sheet. With a mixture of pride and nervousness, Daniel removed the cloth, revealing a painting unlike any he had created before. It depicted 2 figures, clearly recognizable as Eliza and Daniel, standing back to back. But, rather than being separated, they were connected by threads of light that wove between and around them, creating a luminous web that bound them together even as they faced different directions. The background blended their 2 worlds, her structured, geometric patterns flowing into his organic, intuitive forms, creating something entirely new where they merged. "It's called Separate Together," he explained. "It's about how partnership doesn't have to mean merging completely, how we can maintain our individual directions while still being profoundly connected." Eliza felt tears welling in her eyes as she absorbed the image, the visual representation of what they had been struggling to articulate to each other for months. "It's beautiful," she whispered, reaching out to touch the canvas lightly. "It's us, the best version of us." Daniel moved to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his. "I hope so," he said softly. "I want it to." The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility and the fragile beginnings of renewal. Then, from downstairs, came the sound of breaking glass, followed by Ruth's startled cry. They found her in the kitchen, surrounded by shattered porcelain, her grandmother's teacup in pieces on the tile floor. Ruth herself seemed unharmed, but shaken, leaning heavily on the counter. "It just slipped," she explained, as Eliza guided her to a chair while Daniel swept up the fragments. "Clumsy of me," but there was something in her mother's expression that concerned Eliza. A distraction, a worry that seemed deeper than a broken teacup warranted. "What's wrong?" kneeling beside her mother. "And don't say nothing. I know that look." Ruth sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I had a call from the estate agent today. There's an offer on the house. My house. A good one. above asking price. That's wonderful, Eliza said, confused by her mother's distress. Ruth had been considering downsizing for years, finding her family home increasingly difficult to maintain alone. Yes, Ruth agreed, not meeting her daughter's eyes. But the buyers want quick completion, and I've been thinking perhaps it's time I moved back home, to Mumbai. The revelation caught Eliza off guard. Mumbai? But you haven't been back in decades. My cousin Priya is there. She's a widow too. We've been corresponding more. She has room in her home, and there's a community of women our age. Ruth trailed off, then added with uncharacteristic bluntness, and frankly, I don't think your marriage needs construction. Daniel, having disposed of the broken teacup, rejoined them. Ruth, you're welcome here as long as you need to be. You know that. I do, she acknowledged with a small smile. But perhaps what I need is to reclaim my own dreams while I still have time. She straightened in her chair, some of her usual composure returning. There's a cultural center near Priya's home. They offer dance classes for seniors. Can you imagine? At my age. The light in her mother's eyes as she spoke of this possibility was something Eliza had rarely witnessed. A spark of genuine joy, untempered by practical considerations or social expectations. If that's what you want, I'll help however I can, she promised, squeezing her mother's hand. Good, Ruth said decisively, because there's something else. I've spoken to my solicitor about the house here. Eliza tensed, sensing something significant coming. As you know, your father and I purchased this house when we first married, Ruth continued. When Daniel wanted to renovate it, I wasn't entirely supportive. I worried about the financial strain, the instability. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Ruth, that was years ago. Water under the bridge. Perhaps. But I've been less than transparent about certain matters. You see, when your father died, Elizabeth, he left his share of this house to me with the understanding that it would eventually pass to you. I've maintained partial ownership all these years. Eliza frowned, trying to understand the implication. Partial ownership? Of our house? Ruth nodded, looking somewhat ashamed. 25% to be precise. It seemed prudent at the time, a way to maintain some security for you if things didn't work out. The revelation hit Eliza like a physical blow. All these years, her mother had held a stake in their home, a silent vote of no confidence in their marriage, a safety net Eliza had never requested. And now? Her voice with suppressed emotion. Ruth reached into her robe pocket and withdrew a folded document. Now I'm transferring my share to you. Directly to you, Elizabeth, not jointly to both of you. It's your decision what to do with it. The document, a deed transfer, lay on the table between them, its legal language formalizing Ruth's surrender of control and her implicit challenge to her daughter. What will you build with this freedom? Later that night, after Ruth had retired to the guest room and Daniel had retreated to his studio, Eliza sat alone in the living room, the deed transfer on the coffee table before her. The revelation of her mother's partial ownership explained so much. The subtle ways Ruth had influenced their decisions over the years, her pointed questions about renovation costs, her thinly veiled suggestions about resale value when they'd considered more dramatic structural changes. It also represented a crossroads. With full ownership divided between her and Daniel, they could finally make decisions without her mother's shadow influencing the outcome. Or, the thought that formed next surprised her with its clarity and rightness. She could use her portion to secure funding for the wellness center she had once dreamed of creating. The house had appreciated significantly since they'd purchased it. Her share alone would provide substantial seed money. The idea should have terrified her, abandoning the security of her corporate position, risking financial stability on an unproven concept. Yet, as she sat in the quiet house, surrounded by the life she and Daniel had built together, imperfect but real, Eliza felt something shift within her. The anxiety was still there, but it was accompanied by something else: excitement, possibility, a hunger she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She reached for her phone and typed a quick message to Zoe. "Did you take the interview?" The response came almost immediately. "Yes. They offered me the position on the spot. Lower salary but creative freedom and my own project team." Terrified, but saying yes. "Am I crazy?" Eliza smiled, typing back, "Not crazy. Brave. We should talk tomorrow. I have a proposal you might be interested in." As she set down the phone, she became aware of Daniel standing in the doorway, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Everything okay?" he asked. She looked up at him, really looked, seeing both the man she had married and the artist he had become. "No," she answered honestly. "Everything's changing, but maybe that's not a bad thing." He moved to join her on the couch, closer than they had sat in. What's changing? Eliza took a deep breath, then shared the revelation about her mother's ownership stake and the idea that had begun forming in response. The wellness, Daniel said, his expression. You're really considering it. More than considering, she admitted. I've been researching while preparing for the exhibition talk. There's a real need for spaces that combine creative expression with healing practices. And with Zoe's design background and my business experience, you'd leave your job? The question gentle rather than challenging. Eliza considered this. Not immediately. I'd need to transition, build the foundation while maintaining some security. But eventually, yes. Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he reached for her hand, the first intentional touch they had shared in weeks. I think you'd be remarkable at it. And I'd like to help if you want. Not to take over, he added quickly, but to contribute. My art therapy experience might be useful. The offer hung between them, a bridge extending from both sides to meet in the middle. Eliza turned her hand in his, their fingers interlacing naturally. I'd like that. They sat together in the quiet house, hands joined, the deed transfer on the table before them, a symbol of endings and beginnings, of constraints removed and possibilities unveiled. Outside, the first hints of dawn lightened the sky, promising a new day and, perhaps, a new way forward. Not apart, not absorbed into each other, but separate together, as Daniel's painting had portrayed. And in that moment of connection, Eliza felt something she had almost forgotten. The exhilarating vertigo of standing at the edge of the unknown, not with fear, but with anticipation. Not alone, but accompanied. Not diminished by vulnerability, but expanded by it. The morning of the exhibition dawned clear and warm, with sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows in golden ribbons. Eliza woke before her alarm, her body humming with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Beside her, Daniel slept soundly, one arm flung above his head in the abandoned way he had always slept when truly at peace. She studied him in the gentle morning light, the slight grey at his temples that hadn't been there when they'd met, the laugh lines around his eyes that had deepened over the years. His face in repose was both utterly familiar and somehow new, as if she was seeing him through fresh eyes after their months of distance. Careful not to wake him, Eliza slipped from the bed and made her way downstairs. To her surprise, Ruth was already in the kitchen, dressed in a beautiful silk sari in deep purple with gold embroidery, an outfit Eliza hadn't seen her wear in years. You look lovely, Eliza said, accepting the cup of chai her mother offered. Special occasion? Ruth smoothed the fabric with practiced hands. The exhibition, of course. And I've been video chatting with my dance instructor in Mumbai. She suggested I begin reconnecting with my cultural roots even before I arrive. The change in her mother was subtle but unmistakable. A lightness in her movements, a sparkle in her eyes that Eliza associated more with her father's memory than with Ruth herself. It suits you, Ruth smiled, the expression transforming her usually serious face. Change suits us both, I think. They prepared breakfast together, moving around the kitchen with newfound ease, a dance of their own as they chopped fruit, toasted bread, and set the table. When Daniel joined them, hair still damp from the shower, he paused in the doorway, taking in the scene with appreciative surprise. "Good morning," he said, accepting the plate Ruth handed him. "You both look radiant." It was true, Eliza realized. Despite the nervousness about her upcoming talk, she felt more alive than she had in months, perhaps years. The prospect of change, of reclaiming dreams long deferred, had awakened something vital within her. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally between them. Plans for the day, logistics for the exhibition, Ruth's preparations for her eventual move to Mumbai. There was a sense of forward motion, of purpose that bound them together despite their different paths. "I've been thinking," Ruth said, as they cleared the dishes, "about what to do with my house once it's sold. After expenses and setting aside what I'll need for Mumbai, there will be a considerable sum remaining." Eliza and Daniel exchanged glances, both wary of where this might be leading. "I'd like to establish a small foundation," Ruth continued, "for women returning to creative pursuits after significant life interruptions. Nothing extravagant, perhaps scholarships for mature students or seed grants for projects like your wellness center." The proposal left Eliza speechless. This was not the practical, security-focused mother she had known all her life. "That's incredibly generous," Daniel said, filling the silence, "and perfectly aligned with the exhibition theme." Ruth nodded, pleased by his understanding. "I've spent too many years focused on what might go wrong. I'd like to invest in what might go right for a change." Before they left for the gallery, Eliza retreated to the bedroom to review her speech one final time. The notes she had prepared seemed suddenly inadequate, too academic, too detached from the emotional truth she wanted to convey. On impulse, she set aside the carefully crafted text and opened her old journal instead, letting the pages fall open randomly. Her younger self's handwriting filled the margins, questions, doubts, bursts of inspiration, and one phrase that caught her eye. What if the path to security isn't avoiding risk, but embracing meaningful connection? She traced the words with her finger, remembering the late-night conversation with Daniel that had prompted them, a philosophical discussion about art, commerce, and authenticity that had lasted until dawn. They had been so alive then, so engaged with each other's minds, and when had they stopped having those conversations? When had practical concerns and career advancement begun to overshadow the intellectual and emotional connection that had drawn them together in the first place? Eliza closed the journal and tucked it into her bag. She would speak from her heart today, not from prepared notes. The risk felt right, a small act of creative courage to match the larger leap she was contemplating. The Riverside Gallery was already bustling when they arrived, with early attendees moving through the exhibition space in contemplative groups. Mira greeted them at the entrance, elegant in a black jumpsuit that set off her artist's hands, still faintly stained with pigment. "Everything looks amazing," Daniel said, embracing her. "Thank you for including my work." "The exhibition wouldn't be complete without it," Mira replied, her gaze shifting to Eliza. "And thank you for agreeing to speak. Your perspective adds a crucial dimension to the conversation." Eliza nodded, her throat tight with emotion as she surveyed the gallery. The space had been transformed into a journey through artistic rebirth, from early pieces expressing pain and suppression, through experimental works capturing the process of breaking free, to triumphant final expressions of creative reclamation. Daniel's painting, separate together, held a prominent position in the central gallery, its luminous quality drawing visitors like a beacon. Nearby hung collaborative works from his art therapy group, including the concentric circles painted by the woman whose tears had moved Eliza so deeply. As they moved through the exhibition, Eliza was struck by how many of the artists had incorporated architectural elements into their work, structures being dismantled, reimagined, or transcended. The parallel to her own journey from rigid corporate design to the more fluid, holistic approach of her wellness center concept was unmistakable. "It's as if they're all rebuilding in some way," she observed to Daniel as they paused before a particularly powerful installation, a series of transparent boxes containing broken objects reassembled with gold filling the cracks. "Kintsugi," he explained, referring to the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The idea that something can be more beautiful for having been broken, that repair can be a form of enhancement rather than just restoration. The concept resonated deeply as Eliza considered their marriage, not returning to what had been, but creating something new from the fragments, something that honored both the breaks and the healing. As the gallery filled with visitors, Eliza found herself drawn to a small side room she hadn't noticed initially. Inside, a single installation commanded the space, a life-sized sculpture built from ordinary household objects, utensils, fabric scraps, old books, children's toys, arranged to form the foundation and frame of a house. Around the base, recorded voices played softly, describing the invisible labor and emotional architecture that women build daily. With a start, Eliza recognized Daniel's voice among them. "I forgot to see her," the recorded words filled with honest regret, "until I saw how much of me was built by her." Tears pricked at her eyes as she circulated the installation, noticing details that could only have come from intimate knowledge of their home. A wooden spoon, with the handle worn to the shape of her grip, a scrap of the curtain fabric she had selected for their first apartment, love notes they had exchanged during their early years together. The installation was titled simply Unseen Foundations. "This is yours," she said, when Daniel appeared beside her, his expression anxious as he gauged her reaction. He nodded. "With some help from your mother, actually. She contributed several items from your childhood home, things that represented the foundations she built for you." The revelation of her mother's participation added another layer of meaning to this, a recognition of the generational patterns of both support and suppression that had shaped their family's women. Before Eliza could respond, Mira appeared to inform her that it was almost time for her talk. The main gallery had been arranged with chairs facing a small podium, most already filled with attentive visitors. As Eliza made her way to the front, she caught sight of Zoe slipping into a seat near the back, offering an enthusiastic thumbs up of encouragement. Her mother and Daniel sat together in the front row, An unlikely alliance formed through their shared concern for her. Standing at the podium, Eliza felt a moment of panic as she looked out at the expectant faces. She had spoken at countless corporate events, pitched to demanding clients, led teams through complex projects, but never had she felt so exposed, so vulnerable as in this moment. Her prepared notes remained in her bag. Instead, she reached for the old journal sheet, opening it to a random page as she had done that morning. "My name is Eliza Morgan," she began, her voice stronger than she had expected. "And until recently, I would have introduced myself as a senior creative director at Langley & Ross design firm, because that title represented security, achievement, and the carefully structured life I believed I wanted." She paused, looking down at the journal in her hands. "But 20 years ago, I wrote these words. Design isn't just about making things beautiful or functional. It's about creating spaces where people can become more fully themselves. I had forgotten that girl and her vision until circumstances forced me to confront what I had buried." For the next 20 minutes, Eliza spoke without notes, tracing her journey from aspiring designer with dreams of creating healing spaces to corporate executive with a portfolio of commercial successes, but an increasingly empty creative well. She shared the moment of reckoning when she had discovered Daniel's participation in the art therapy program. The hurt of exclusion, but also the mirror it had held up to her own choices. "Creative suppression doesn't always come from external forces," she explained, her gaze moving across the attentive audience. "Sometimes it's a slow surrender, a series of small compromises made in the name of practicality or security. We tell ourselves we're being responsible, mature, realistic, and those things matter. They do. But when we silence our creative voices entirely, we lose something essential. We forget how to dream loudly." The phrase, her mother's words from that late-night kitchen conversation, brought a small smile to Ruth's face as she sat straight-backed in the front row, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but her eyes shining with unshed tears. "What I'm learning," Eliza continued, "is that true security isn't found in avoiding risk or suppressing parts of ourselves that seem impractical. It's found in integration, in bringing all of who we are to what we do, in allowing ourselves to be seen, even, especially, the parts we've hidden away." As she spoke, Eliza felt something shifting within her, a release of tension she had carried for so long she had forgotten it wasn't a natural part of her being. The words flowed not from careful preparation, but from a place of authentic discovery, each sentence revealing truth to herself as much as to her listeners. "I stand here today not as someone who has figured it all out," she concluded, "but as someone who is learning to dream loudly again, to risk vulnerability for the sake of wholeness, to build foundations that are seen and celebrated, not hidden and taken for granted." The applause that followed her final words seemed to come from a distance, as if she were emerging from a deep meditation. She looked out at the audience and saw not critics, but fellow travelers, people who recognized their own struggles in her story, who understood the courage required to reclaim buried dreams. As she stepped down from the podium, Daniel met her with eyes full of pride and something deeper, a recognition of her journey that went beyond mere support to true partnership. "That was beautifully taking her. Thank you for sharing it." The remainder of the exhibition opening passed in a blur of conversations, introductions, and unexpected connections. Eliza found herself approached by women of various ages, each with their own story of creative recovery or suppression. Some sought advice, others simply wanted to express gratitude for giving voice to experiences they had thought were theirs alone. Zoe cornered her near the refreshment table, her excitement palpable. "That was incredible. And I have news. I've accepted the position at Greenhouse Studios." "Congratulations," Eliza said warmly, genuinely happy for the young woman's courage. "When do you start?" 2 weeks, Zoe replied. "But about your text lab, you mentioned a proposal." Eliza nodded, suddenly certain of the path forward. "How would you feel about a side collaboration? I'm in the early stages of developing a wellness center concept that could use your design sensibility. It would be part-time initially, but potentially grow into something more substantial." Zoe's eyes widened. "Are you serious? That sounds amazing. But won't it conflict with your position at Langley & Ross?" "I'm working on a transition plan," Eliza explained, the decision crystallizing as she spoke it aloud. "It won't happen overnight, but I'm ready to move in a new direction." As the evening wound down, Eliza found herself drawn once again to the Unseen Foundations installation. In the quieter gallery, she could hear the recorded testimonials more clearly, voices of recognition and gratitude for the invisible work that sustains families, relationships, and communities. Ruth joined her there, moving with careful dignity despite her cane. "Your father would have been proud," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just of your success, but of your courage to change course." Eliza turned to her mother, seeing beyond the practical exterior to the woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to provide stability. "I think he would have been proud of both of us," she replied, "for learning to dream again." Ruth nodded, her gaze fixed on a small wooden box incorporated into the installation, a jewelry box that had once belonged to her own mother. "It's never too late, is it, to reclaim what was lost?" "No," Eliza agreed, taking her mother's hand. "It's never too late." They stood together in comfortable silence, 3 generations of women represented in the installation before them, past, present, and future, connected by both constraint and possibility. Later that night, as Eliza and Daniel walked home through the quiet streets, a gentle summer rain began to fall. Not the heavy downpour of that fateful day months ago, but a soft mist that seemed to bless the city with renewal. "What happens now?" Daniel asked as they paused beneath a streetlight, its glow creating a halo in the misty air. Eliza considered the question, aware of how much had changed since she had last walked home in the rain, clutching her promotion certificate and harboring suspicions about her husband's behavior. "Now we build something new," she said finally. "Together but separately. Your art, my wellness center, a shared life with room for individual dreams." He smiled, the expression lighting his entire face in a way she had missed desperately. "I like the sound of that. And what about us? You and me?" The question was gentle, without pressure or expectation, an invitation rather than a demand. "Us is a work in progress," she answered honestly, "but one I'm committed to, one worth the effort of creation and recreation." Daniel nodded, understanding the truth in her words. The best works always are. They continued home through the soft rain, not touching but walking in sync, their steps finding a shared rhythm despite their different paces, separate but connected, just as his painting had portrayed. In the days that followed, practical reality asserted itself alongside their newfound vision. Eliza scheduled a meeting with her firm's partners to discuss a gradual transition plan. Daniel submitted a proposal for expanded art therapy programs at the community center. Ruth began sorting through decades of accumulated possessions in preparation for her move to Mumbai. The work was neither simple nor straightforward. There were financial calculations to consider, logistics to arrange, plans to formulate and reformulate as circumstances changed. Yet underlying these practical concerns was a current of energy that sustained them, a sense of purpose that made the challenges feel worthwhile rather than overwhelming. One morning, 2 weeks after the exhibition, Eliza arrived at the office to find Marcus, the creative director, waiting by her door. "I saw the exhibition," he said without preamble. "Your husband's work is remarkable. And your speech. It's been on my mind." Eliza invited him in, curious about this unexpected visit. Marcus rarely ventured from his corner office except for client meetings or presentations. "I've been at this firm for 27 years, built a solid reputation, a comfortable life. But lately, I've been wondering if I've lost something." He tapped his fingers on her desk, a nervous gesture. Eliza waited, sensing there was more to this confession. "The Westfield project," Marcus said finally. "The concept your intern presented, the one incorporating wellness elements and community spaces. It's exactly what the client has been looking for without knowing it." Surprise rippled seeing Zoe's. He nodded. "She's been presenting them to anyone who will listen. Passionate young woman. Reminds me of someone, actually." His gaze was pointed. "And you think Westfield?" "I know they would," Marcus replied. "Their marketing research shows declining foot traffic in traditional mall environments. They need innovation, not just renovation." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'd like you to lead the project team, full creative control, with Zoe as your second, despite her youth." The offer was unexpected, an opportunity to bring elements of her wellness center concept into a commercial project with substantial resources behind it, a bridge between her corporate experience and her emerging vision. "I'm flattered," Eliza said carefully, "but I should be transparent. I'm developing plans for my own wellness design studio. My long-term future may not be with." To her surprise, Marcus smiled. "I know, office gossip travels fast, but this could be a perfect transition project, high profile, aligned with your interests, and it would give you practical experience with the wellness concepts you want to develop independently." The proposal was tempting, a chance to test her ideas with the safety net of institutional support before launching out completely on her own. "I'd need flexibility, already considering the possibility. And I'd want to bring in Daniel as a consultant on the therapeutic arts programming element." Marcus nodded, looking pleased. "Done. Draft a formal proposal by next week, and we'll present it to Westfield together." As he left, Eliza sat motionless at her desk, processing the unexpected turn of events. The universe, it seemed, was offering not an either-or choice, but a both-and possibility, a way to bridge her past and future that honored both. That evening, she shared the development with Daniel over dinner, her excitement building as she described Marcus's proposal and the potential it represented. "It's perfect," Daniel said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "A chance to introduce your wellness concepts to a mainstream audience while building toward your independent center." Ruth, who had been listening quietly, nodded her approval. "A prudent transition, though I confess I'm still adjusting to this new world where prudent and creative fulfillment aren't mutually exclusive terms." They laughed together, the sound filling the kitchen with a warmth that had been absent for too long. Later, as they prepared for bed, Daniel hesitated by the dresser, a small wrapped package in his hands. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you that," offering it to Eliza. It seemed right tonight. She unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful leather-bound sketchbook, its pages thick and creamy, perfect for architectural renderings and design concept. Inside the cover, Daniel had written a simple inscription: "For new foundations, seen and celebrated." "Thank you," she whispered, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and all it represented. "It's perfect." He smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that had once been commonplace but had become precious through its absence. "There's something else," he said, producing a second, smaller package. "This one's from your mother." Curious, Eliza unwrapped it to find a small, antique silver key on a delicate chain. A note in Ruth's precise handwriting explained, "This was the key to my first dance studio. I kept it all these years as a reminder of what might have been. Now I give it to you as a symbol of what still can be. Wear it close to your heart, but never again lock away your dreams." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes as Daniel helped her fasten the necklace, the key settling against her skin like a talisman. Cool at first, then warming to her body temperature until it felt like a natural extension of herself. "I feel like I'm finally waking up," she confessed as they lay together in the darkness, closer than they had been in months, yet still maintaining the respectful space their healing required. "Like I've been sleepwalking through my own life." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his breathing soft and steady beside her. "I felt that way too," he admitted, "for a long time. That's what the art therapy helped me recognize, how much of myself I'd put to sleep to avoid the pain of creative disappointment." "And now?" she asked, turning to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the dim room. "Now I'm awake," he said simply. "Sometimes it hurts more this way, but it's also more everything, more alive." The truth of his words settled between them. A shared understanding that the path they were choosing wasn't necessarily easier, but was infinitely more authentic than the separate silences they had been maintaining. In the weeks that followed, their lives took on a new rhythm, busy but purposeful, challenging but fulfilling. Eliza divided her time between the Westfield project, which had been enthusiastically received by the client, and the foundational planning for her wellness center. Daniel expanded his art therapy work while preparing for a solo exhibition that would build on themes from unseen foundations. Ruth, meanwhile, completed the sale of her house and began the process of securing her visa for India. She spent her final weeks in London reconnecting with old friends, visiting cultural sites she had long ignored, and, to Eliza's delight, attending regular dance classes at a studio that welcomed older beginners. "It's remarkable," Ruth commented one evening as they shared tea in the garden, "how the body remembers what the mind has tried to forget. These movements, I performed them last over 40 years ago, yet my muscles recall them, even if with less flexibility." "Muscle memory," Daniel suggested, joining them with a plate of biscuits. "The body's way of preserving what matters, even when we think we've moved on." Ruth considered this, sipping her tea thoughtfully. Perhaps that's true of dreams as well. They wait patiently in some hidden part of ourselves until we're ready to reclaim them. The observation lingered with Eliza as she continued developing her wellness center concept, now with Zoe's part-time assistance and Daniel's input on the therapeutic elements. What had begun as a vague memory of an abandoned dream was taking concrete form. Floor plans, program offerings, financial projections, and marketing strategies emerging from collaborative sessions that often stretched late into the night. One such evening, as they worked at the dining table surrounded by sketches and notes, Eliza realized that something fundamental had shifted in their home's energy. The silence that had once felt oppressive had been replaced by the productive hum of shared purpose, different pursuits united by mutual support and occasional intersection. "I think we need to consider a different location," Zoe was saying, her brow furrowed as she studied the site plans they had been considering. "This building has potential, but the neighborhood demographics don't align with our target client base." Daniel, sketching idly as he listened, nodded in agreement. "The emotional resonance of the space matters too. It needs to feel like a sanctuary from the moment people approach it, not just once they're inside." Their perspectives complement Zoe's practical design considerations, balancing Daniel's intuitive understanding of emotional response, with Eliza's business acumen providing the framework that would make the vision sustainable. It was during one of these sessions that Ruth appeared in the doorway, her expression unusually hesitant. "I've been thinking," approaching the table with careful "about your location." Eliza looked up, curious about her mother's interest in the project details. "Do you have a suggestion?" Ruth nodded, withdrawing a folded newspaper from her pocket. "There's a property listing I noticed, a former dance studio in Hampstead. The building is historic, with good bones as they say, but in need of renovation. The price reflects its condition." Eliza took the listing, studying the photographs with growing interest. The building had a distinctive character: large windows, high ceilings, wooden floors worn smooth by years of movement. "It's been on the market for months," Ruth continued. "The owner is motivated to sell, and," she hesitated, then plunged forward, "I would like to contribute to the purchase as an investor. A portion of the proceeds from my house sale, to be precise." The offer left Eliza speechless. Her mother, practical, risk-averse Ruth, wanting to invest in what was essentially a startup venture with uncertain returns. "Mother, that's incredibly generous. But are you sure? This is your retirement security we're talking about." Ruth straightened, her posture reflecting the dignity that had always been her hallmark. "I'm not proposing to invest my entire nest egg, Elizabeth. I'm making a calculated decision to support a venture I believe in, led by people I trust." Her expression softened slightly. "Besides, I rather like the symmetry of a former dance studio becoming a wellness center, one dream making space for another." The following day, they visited the property together, Eliza, Daniel, Zoe, and Ruth, forming an unlikely but complementary assessment. The building, as Ruth had suggested, had good bones, a solid structure beneath the peeling paint and worn finishes. The main studio space was flooded with natural light from tall, arched windows, and smaller. Rooms off the central area offered potential for private therapy sessions, consultations, or specialized workshop. As they explored, Eliza found herself mentally arranging the space, envisioning the flow of movement, the interaction of different healing modalities, the balance of private and communal areas. It felt right, in a way none of the other properties they had considered had. "What do you think?" she asked Daniel, as they stood in the center of the main studio, their voices echoing slightly in the empty space. He turned slowly, taking in the proportions and light. "I think it has soul," he said finally. "You can feel the creative energy that's lived here, all those years of movement and expression. It's in the walls." Zoe, ever practical despite her youth, was already measuring and making notes. "The renovation would be substantial, but nothing structural from what I can see. And the location is perfect, accessible but slightly removed from the main hustle. It feels like a retreat already." Ruth, moving carefully around the perimeter, nodded in agreement. "There's a quietness here, despite being in the city, a sense of pause." She ran her hand along a ballet bar still attached to one wall. "This place has held dreams before. It knows how to support them." The decision, when it came, felt less like a business choice and more like a recognition, an acknowledgement of alignment between vision and reality. With Ruth's investment, Eliza's savings, including the funds from her share of their home's increased value, and a modest small business loan, the purchase became possible. The renovation would be done in phases, allowing the center to open with limited offerings while expanding as resources permitted. The weeks that followed brought a whirlwind of activity, finalizing the purchase, developing renovation plans, completing the Westfield project to enthusiastic client response, and preparing for Ruth's departure to Mumbai. Through it all, the Morgan Lawson household maintained its newfound balance of shared purpose and individual pursuits, with space for both collaboration and independence. The night before Ruth's flight, they hosted a small farewell dinner. Close friends gathered to wish her well on her new adventure. The house was filled with conversation, laughter, and the bittersweet acknowledgement of endings that make new beginnings possible. As the evening wound down, Ruth found Eliza in the kitchen, preparing a final pot of chai for their guests. "I have something for you," she said, offering a small, fabric-wrapped bundle. One last piece of the past to carry forward. Eliza unwrapped it to find a collection of handwritten recipes, not for food, but for herbal teas and tonics that had been passed down through generations of women in their family. For energy and focus, Ruth explained, pointing to one page covered in her mother's flowing script. For creative clarity, indicating another in her own precise handwriting. And this one, she added, turning to a final page where she had recorded a blend of her own creation for courage when facing the unknown. Eliza traced the words with her finger, moved by this tangible connection to her heritage, a lineage of women who had found ways to nurture themselves and others, even when their larger dreams were deferred. "Thank you," she whispered, embracing her mother with uncharacteristic demonstrativeness. "For everything." Ruth returned the embrace briefly, then stepped back, composure reasserting itself, though her eyes remained bright with emotion. "You're building something beautiful, Elizabeth. Not just the center, but a life that honors all of who you are. That's all I've ever wanted for you, even when I expressed it poorly." The next morning, they accompanied Ruth to the airport, a family united in supporting her journey, even as their own paths continued to evolve. The farewell was emotional, but not devastating, infused with the understanding that this was not an ending, but a transformation of their relationship. "Visit soon," Ruth said, as her flight was her usual composure wavering. "Both of you. I want to show you my Mumbai, the city I knew before I became so focused on security and propriety." "We will," Eliza promised, holding her mother's hand until the last possible moment. "Dance for me when you get there." Ruth smiled, a girlish expression that took years from her face. "Every day," she promised, before turning to join the boarding line, her posture straight despite the cane, her head held high as she moved toward her reclaimed dream. The drive home was quiet, both Eliza and Daniel lost in their own thoughts about the changes that had reshaped their lives in the months since that rainy afternoon, when Eliza had come home early to find her husband posed for Mira's sketch. "It's strange," Eliza said finally, as they approached their neighborhood. "6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly what my life would look like in 5 years. Now everything is uncertain. My career, our home, even my relationship with my mother. Yet I feel more secure than I did then." Daniel considered this, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel. Maybe that's because real security isn't about certainty, it's about having the courage to face uncertainty with open eyes, together. The wisdom in his words resonated as they pulled into their driveway. Their home looked different somehow, not physically changed, but imbued with new meaning after all they had experienced within its walls. Inside, the house felt both emptier without Ruth's presence and somehow more spacious, room to breathe, to grow, to continue becoming. In the days that followed, they settled into yet another new rhythm, Eliza dividing her time between the firm, where she was training her replacement, and the wellness center renovations. Daniel balancing his community art therapy work with preparations for his exhibition and contributions to the center's therapeutic programming. The former dance studio gradually transformed under their care, walls refreshed with soft, natural colors, worn floors sanded and refinished to reveal the beauty of the original wood. The ballet bar repurposed as a support for a living wall of plants that brought vitality to the main space. One evening, about a month after Ruth's departure, Eliza worked late at the center, finalizing details for the soft opening scheduled for the following week. She had sent Zoe and the contractors home hours ago, wanting time alone in the space that had evolved from distant to tangible reality. As she moved through the rooms, checking small details and making notes for final adjustments, she felt a profound sense of rightness, not the complacent security she had once pursued, but a dynamic alignment between her inner truth and outer expression. The sound of the front door opening broke her reverie. She turned to find Daniel standing in the entrance, a small cooler in one hand and what appeared to be his painting in the other. "I thought you might be hungry," he explained, setting the cooler on the reception desk they had salvaged from the original studio. "And I brought something else as well." Curious, Eliza joined him as he unpacked a simple but perfect meal: crusty bread, cheese, grapes, and a bottle of the wine they had served at their wedding. He had remembered glasses, napkins, even a small vase with a single hydrangea bloom. "What's the occasion?" she asked, genuinely touched by the gesture. "No occasion," he replied, arranging their impromptu picnic on the desk. "Just celebrating the ordinary miracle of finding our way back to ourselves and to each other." They ate together in the quiet studio, the late evening light casting long shadows across the freshly painted walls. The conversation flowed easily between practical matters, opening plans, scheduling, final touches, and deeper reflections on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "What about your other surprise?" Eliza asked as they finished them, nodding toward his art supplies still by the door. Daniel smiled, a hint of nervousness in his expression. "I had an idea for the entry wall, the one we've been debating how to fill. A mural that would set the tone for the entire space." He hesitated, then added, "But only if you like the concept. This is your vision, Eliza. I don't want to impose." "Our vision," she corrected gently. "At least the parts we're creating together. Show me what you're thinking." He retrieved his portfolio and opened it to reveal a series of sketches, designs that incorporated elements of nature, human forms in various states of healing and growth, and architectural features that echoed both stability and transformation. "It's based on kintsugi again," he explained, pointing to golden lines that wound through the composition, connecting its diverse elements. "The art of beautiful repair, honoring both the breaks and the healing." Eliza studied the designs, moved by how perfectly they captured the essence of what she had been trying to create. A space that acknowledged brokenness not as failure, but as part of a larger journey toward wholeness. "It's perfect," looking up to meet his gaze. "Absolutely perfect." He exhaled in relief, then began explaining his ideas for implementation, a collaborative process that would invite future clients to contribute elements to the mural, making it a living artwork that evolved with the center itself. As they talked, Eliza felt the final pieces of their reconnection falling into place. Not a return to what had been, but the creation of something new that honored both their individual journeys and their shared path. "I love you," he said suddenly, interrupting his explanation of color theory. "Not despite the changes we've both gone through, but because of them. Because we had the courage to break apart and find our way back differently." Daniel set down his sketches, his expression serious as he considered her words. "I love you too," he replied finally. "The you that you've always been and the you that you're becoming. All of it." The simplicity of the exchange belied its profound significance, an acknowledgement that love wasn't static but evolutionary, growing and changing as they did. Outside, a soft summer rain began to fall, droplets tapping against the tall windows in a gentle rhythm. The sound transported Eliza back to that fateful afternoon when she had arrived home early, umbrella dripping, to find her carefully constructed world beginning to unravel. Full circle, moving to the window to watch the rain. Daniel joined her, standing close but not touching, respecting the space between them that was no longer a divide, but a dance of individual selves in loving relation. "Not a circle," he corrected gently. "A spiral. We are covering similar ground, but at a different level, moving forward even as we return." The insight resonated deeply as they stood together in the quiet studio, rain washing the windows of their new beginning, cleansing the past without erasing it, each drop a reminder of how far they had come since that first rainstorm and how much further they might go together. Days later, the Wellness Center welcomed its first visitors. A small group of friends, colleagues, and community members gathered for a soft opening that would allow Eliza and her team to refine their offerings before the official launch. Daniel's mural, still in its early stages, already commanded attention in the entry space, a visual promise of the integration and healing the center hoped to facilitate. Ruth, unable to attend in person, participated via video call, beaming with pride as she virtually toured the transformed space from her cousin's home in Mumbai. As Eliza moved among her guests, explaining the center's philosophy and programs, she caught sight of the silver key hanging around her neck, her mother's gift, a reminder of dreams deferred and reclaimed. She touched it briefly, drawing strength from its symbolism as she stepped forward to formally welcome everyone. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice clear and confident in the space that had once held another woman's dancing dreams and now contained her own vision of creative healing. "This center represents many things: a professional evolution, a personal reclamation, and most importantly, a community space where creative expression and healing can intertwine." She glanced at Daniel, who stood near his mural, paint-spattered and beaming with quiet pride. At Zoe, whose design contributions were evident in every thoughtful detail of the space. At Ruth's face on the tablet screen, elegant in a traditional Indian scarf, eyes bright with emotion. "We all carry creative impulses within us," Eliza continued, finding the words as she spoke them. "Sometimes they flow freely, and sometimes they're suppressed by practical concerns or fear or simple neglect. This center exists to honor those impulses, to nurture them back to life when they've been silenced, and to celebrate the healing that comes when we allow ourselves to create authentically." The small crowd applauded warmly, and as Eliza looked at the faces surrounding her, supportive, curious, open to the experience she was offering, she felt a profound sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with physical location and everything to do with alignment between inner truth and outer expression. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the center had been tidied for the following day's first actual clients, Eliza and Daniel walked home together through streets washed clean by the afternoon's rain. The air smelled of wet pavement and summer flowers, and stars were beginning to appear in the clearing sky. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked as they approached their house, the home they had renovated together years ago and were now considering selling to find a space that better reflected their evolving needs. Eliza considered the question, wanting to give an honest answer rather than a reflexively positive one. "I'm thinking about foundations," she said finally. "How we build them, hide them, take them for granted, and how sometimes the most important work of our lives is making them visible, to ourselves and to others." Daniel nodded, understanding the layers in her response. "And how do you feel about the foundations we're building now, both separately and together?" They had reached their front gate, but instead of entering immediately, Eliza paused, looking up at the house that had witnessed both their disconnection and their gradual, imperfect reconnection. "I feel like they're solid," she said after a moment. "Not rigid, but flexible enough to support growth and change. And most importantly, they're seen, acknowledged, celebrated even." Daniel smiled, opening the gate for her with a small gesture that managed to be both courtly and comfortably familiar. "No more unseen foundations," he agreed. As they entered their home together, the lights low, the rooms quiet, but filled with possibility, Eliza felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. No more hiding essential parts of herself for the sake of practicality or security. No more suppressing creative impulses that seemed imprudent or risky. No more unseen foundations supporting others while remaining unacknowledged herself. Instead, a life built on integration, the structured and the free, the practical and the creative, the individual and the shared, all given space to exist in dynamic balance rather than forced compromise. Daniel, "I'm proud of us for the courage to where we are." Eliza nodded, feeling the truth of his words in her own experience. "I am too. Not just of what we've accomplished, but of who we're becoming in the process." He reached for her then, and she stepped willingly into his embrace, not losing herself in it as she might once have feared, but meeting him as an equal, separate but profoundly connected, just as his painting had portrayed. Outside, the last of the rain clouds parted, revealing a sky full of stars above their home, timeless witnesses to the ancient, ongoing human work of breaking open, reaching out, and building anew. If stories like this moved you, share them. There are still foundations waiting to